Okay, let's all rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
President Hammond.
Here.
Vice President Daly.
Here.
Trustee Clements.
Here.
Trustee Headland.
Here.
Trustee Parr.
Here.
I'm stepping in tonight for Laura Hammond. She's a little under the weather, so I'm going to pinch hit here and lead the meeting. The next meeting of the Haldane Board of Education is scheduled for March 19th at 7 p.m. right here. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Benante for our special presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Daly. I'm going to keep my comments brief since there's two presentations this evening and maybe a lot of surrounding conversation on both of those. But I did want to mention, unfortunately, that our girls basketball team lost this evening to Millbrook in a regional game. So they had a great season, but lost in their regional game over at Mount St. Mary earlier this evening. But we're all very proud of them. They had a great season, another great season. So again, congrats to Coach Stevens and C. Wright and our girls for a great basketball season. I'm going to transition right into one of our reports, so I'm going to slide down. Excuse me. Nope, you're fine.
Okay.
Okay, so that should display fine. Celia, are you okay on the visual there with me here? Great, thank you. I just want to make sure anybody who happens to be watching at home can see these slides well. So as part of the budget development process, I want to make sure we get in the routine of providing an extended report on pupil personnel services each school year. So while this is not an extensive report this evening, I made some comments related to the performance of special education students during my curriculum report last week, excuse me. I may have further comments in the budget report. We really should be providing an annual report to the Board of Education on this particular department, no different than we would in curriculum and instruction. So I have just a few notes that I want to go through with the board to give you an idea of our spending in this area and then answer any questions that you may have. So again, the Department of Pupil Personnel Services entails really a lot, but to hit on the big elements of it, special education being a primary component of the department, Section 504, which I'll speak to in a few moments, any school health services that we offer, being another branch of pupil personnel services, home tutoring, if we have students who are out sick and require instruction while they are at home, as part of pupil personnel services, as well as any issues in providing services to students who may be temporarily homeless or in long-term homeless environments. Typically, our staffing associated with this department are our special education teachers, our speech and language therapists, our nurses, our counselors, our psychologists, our social workers, our occupational and physical therapists, and other ancillary staff. Haldane, just for some background information, has 97 students with disabilities throughout our school system. Our classification rate hovers right around 12%. We're below the state average in that. But that being said, a number of students who require services through special education. Additionally, we have 38 students who do not necessarily attend school on our campus here, but we are required to plan and oversee the administration of their academic services or related services or full programming. And these would be students, preschool students who may be eligible for early intervention services, students who are placed in BOCES settings or any state-approved day programs, or residential schools, and some students who attend other school districts where there may be an educational program, and through the Committee of Special Education it was determined that while Haldane did not have a program for them here that best met their needs, maybe another local school district does. So we're responsible for those students in addition to all of the students who are on our campus. We also have 62 students who receive services through Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and that's students who may have a physical or mental impairment which substantially limits a major life function, and education is a major life function. So we have, again, 62 students who are eligible for some sort of support through Section 504. And again, the department's responsible for overseeing that. Yep.
Just a quick question from a process perspective.
Mhm.
For the 38 students who aren't serviced in the district,
Right.
but who live here, how is the nature of the services that they require determined? Because obviously that has cost implications. They're serviced elsewhere, but we bear some or
Right.
all the cost of that.
Right.
How's that work?
So the Committee of Special Education is required to meet at least once annually with the student's family and any other providers who may be attached to the student. If the student is at another school district, representatives of from that particular school, whether it be a residential school or a BOCES setting. And at that meeting, they will discuss the student's needs, their academic progress, any evaluative testing that's been done, any medical evaluations that have been done by outside doctors that are being presented, and then they'll determine and develop the educational plan for that student, the IEP for the upcoming school year, and then it's up to us to coordinate how those needs are going to be met, whether we're going to address those needs in-house here at Haldane and we have a program for a student, or whether there's another program that exists that best meets that child's needs.
Okay.
So it's annually.
Okay.
It could happen more frequently depending on the parent's request or the school's request, but it happens at least once annually.
The general oversight for the determination of the program is determined by the Haldane district, even though they're not serviced here.
It's determined by the committee.
By the committee, sorry.
Yes,
Got it.
of
Yep.
which the parent's a part.
Yep, got it.
So
Sorry.
it's determined by that group.
Great, thank you.
All right. Just one more comment on that before I transition to the next slide. I think the unique piece for us here in Haldane, being a smaller school district, is that sometimes we have students who present with a very particular type of need, whereas in larger school districts, maybe there's a program specifically for students who demonstrate having a specific need. For example, children who fall somewhere on the pervasive developmental disorder spectrum, autism, Asperger's. But because of our size, we don't necessarily have enough students to design a program tailored to the specific needs of one student, whereas other districts can, which is why we may identify other school districts that are local that have a program that maybe is a really good fit for one of our students and
Totally makes sense.
access it through there. So we provide a range of service delivery models in special education, specifically at the elementary, middle, and high school level. You'll see the integrated co-teaching model is listed each time here. Our emphasis whenever we're providing educational services for students is to do so in the least restrictive environment as possible. So for the majority, that means our special education students are able to access the general education program, and we may align additional support to those classrooms or to that program. And typically that's what you would refer to as an integrated co-teaching model, where we have a general education teacher and a special education teacher in the classroom at the same time. The model can vary from day to day, but generally the special educator is responsible for the oversight and the implementation of the IEP for particular students in that classroom and provides a level of support to the classroom program. I spoke to this last week. What we want to be attuned to is that special education support really should be specialized instruction designed to allow for our special education students to access the same grade level standards that their general education peers are in a given lesson or class. We also have a special class setting, which tends to be a more intensive support which would not be a part of a co-taught class. So generally your special class support happens outside of the general classroom. So these are students who have perhaps more of a significant need in reading or mathematics, and students may be pulled out for that level of support in a smaller group setting. And then at the middle and high school level, currently offering a level of resource room support. Resource room support, depending on its design, typically would be even a lower level of support than integrated co-teaching. It may be supplemental support in the area of reading or ELA and mathematics. But generally, if there was a gradient, resource rooms on the lower end, integrated co-teaching, a little bit more intensive support, special class, even more intensive than integrated co-teaching. We could, and it's just by function of this year, we could have students at the elementary school who receive resource room support. Just as I was pulling this information, I did not see any indication that we currently did, but it very well could be a program or a service delivery model at the elementary as well. So again, we're in budget season. This is meant to be part of a budget presentation. So I want to give you an overview of our spending in special education, specifically over the last 4 school years and proposed going into next school year. So you'll see the numbers we budgeted in our actual spending here. Typically, we're in the $2.4 to $2.7 million range. This is inclusive of the salaries and benefits for our special education staff, BOCES as well, contractual services and materials and supplies. This would not include guidance or social workers, the psychologists, or any health services that student receives. So I'm keeping that out of this figure here, just trying to give you, the most concrete figure in terms of staff who are attached to exclusively to our special education students in our special education program. If I were to pull out BOCES placements and other services, that's the most probably the other most significant cost. They range in these amounts, as you can see, over the last 4 years.
So I'm sorry, is this a subsection of the previous, or?
It is, yes.
Okay, great.
This is a subsection of that. So in addition to our own staff, salaries and benefits, and BOCES placements and services back in these figures, those are the two main contributors to these costs. I think our staff comes in slightly over 1.2 or 3 million, and then when combined with BOCES placements and services, you'll see we're getting pretty close to $2 million. And again, those aren't exact figures; those are just rough estimates as I was going through this today with Ms. Dinio. But those are the two primary costs associated with the special ed program.
Just a quick question. Budgeting for BOCES has gone down over years. In particular, the costs look like they're roughly similar.
Yes.
In particular.
I would say when we're looking at this, we're dealing with very relatively smaller numbers of students. So one student leaving a BOCES program, maybe graduating, whatever it may be, could be of significant cost that's influencing this. 2 students, whatever it may be. So there's, I wouldn't say there's necessarily been a dedicated strategy to pull students back from BOCES to service in district. We probably have 1 or 2 who we maybe felt were ready to come back to service at Haldane. That could be influencing this cost, but I wouldn't say there's been a conscious effort to necessarily do it. It's likely just being influenced by the needs of the students in any given year in their programming.
Wouldn't the fact that we started the academy when
could,
Dr. Bowers
yeah.
here have an influence on that?
It could.
I mean, just because I think it's important. Like when I looked at these numbers, I noticed 2 things. One, I noticed that decline that I do think is and was intentionally an attempt to save the district some money, quite frankly, as well as provide what we thought would be an appropriate and even better education for those kids. So I noticed that. The other thing that when I look at these numbers that really sticks out to me is the fact, and I know we've said this in other settings, but I'm going to reiterate it, is how with our small numbers, minor changes in the student population, a
Yes.
child coming in, a child leaving, can have such a significant impact on our budget. And you can
Right.
see that where years where we've budgeted more and we spent less, and that was a good year, but the opposite can
Sure.
happen as well, because these placements can be very expensive.
Just two things that stand out to me as I look at the figures, and I must admit, I'm not too far into the nitty gritty on this particular item. The academy, I think that was part of the basis of the academy. But that being said, the academy was up and running this year, and our actual spending this year exceeds our spending from the 3 previous years. Other placements would encounter or encompass day and residential placements, which are the most expensive. BOCES generally is much more cost effective than day and residential programs where the cost can get upwards of $100,000. So whereas BOCES costs can generally be right around $30,000 to the district. So typically we wouldn't be pulling students back in from day and residential programs
Of course, yeah.
to the
thanks.
academy. It would be
Yeah.
students who would be at in the BOCES setting, just because the needs are so pervasive that we're just not set up well on campus to provide that level of support.
And speaking of the academy, Dr. Brdg, could we have an update on that at some point?
Oh, sure.
I mean, not necessarily right now or tonight,
Sure,
but
thanks for that.
but it's something we've talked a lot about over the past couple of years. It's why make it? What are the benefits? Who's going there? Who's graduating from there? How much is it costing us? How much
Sure.
money are we saving? Et cetera, et cetera. It would be great to have an update
No
on
problem.
where we're at with that at some point.
I say no problem because we did a review of the program as part of our internal budget discussion. So we have that review. We could just forward it on to the board, and you can see where we're at with our thoughts related to it as an administration. Okay, great. Just some final thoughts here as we transition. As we transition into the full budget presentation. Really, as we enter the next school year, if there's one other thing that kind of stands out through conversations over the course of the year is having and establishing a guiding vision for our special education program. I think the continued kind of transitions and leadership of the department over the years has led to just some practices continuing, but not necessarily having a guiding vision or thought that's providing direction to the full department, which in turn is would influence the scope of program and experience that our special education students have here on campus. So that's definitely an area of need for next year and a priority for us as we search for the next director of pupil personnel services. And part of that review should be a comprehensive needs assessment that's conducted very early on, which would include feedback from our parents, feedback from our students, and feedback from our staff, and held up against some other practices that are best practices that are going on regionally in our region, because there are some exemplary practices that are going on when it comes to the education of those who are differently abled. So we look forward to that work next school year. I think it's a really good time and opportunity for someone to come in with a fresh perspective and kind of assess where we've been and really work with our staff and our community to establish where we're going in this area. Good. So with that, I'd like to transition to another budget presentation, if I may. All right. Good there. Yeah. So this presentation is also included in board docs for any community member who may want to access it. You would have access to it there. And this is the culmination of the administration's work over the last few months with guidance from the Board of Education to develop the educational plan and budget rationale for next school year. So this is our proposal to the Board of Education, and this is what we'll be working with for the next 5 weeks or so before the board's in a position to adopt a budget to put before the community for vote in May. We'll talk about those dates a little further down the line. So where possible, some of this information you've seen before, I'll just speak to it briefly and I'll move on from it because I'm sure you're pretty familiar with it. As everyone's aware, we're working in a tax cap era where there's certain limitations on the school district for how much money the school district can levy from the community any given year. There's a formula that's applied to this, and that formula allows for certain exclusions, which may mean from district to district you may see a different tax cap. For this school year, for next school year, Haldane's property tax cap is 2.71%. Relative to other districts in the area, that's a little higher. And there's years where we've been a little lower. It really is driven more so by the exclusions in the formula from year to year. Ms. Dinio has presented some key figures over the course of the last few weeks. If we look at the 2018-19 final budget, was right around $24 million, and our proposed budget for next year is a budget-to-budget increase of approximately $500,000. That's a 2.1% budget-to-budget increase and a 2.71% levy-to-levy increase. I have another chart later on. We'll just give you a kind of a 3 to 4 year perspective on where we've fallen in those levy-to-levy increases and budget-to-budget increases over the last few years. Again, another slide. You're at least likely familiar with parts of this in terms of our revenue summary. So our budget and proposed budget, our anticipated state aid, which could vary still a little bit before next school year. Other revenue sources, our appropriated fund balance, reserves, and our levy.
Hey, just a quick question on this.
Mm-hmm.
State aid, I don't know, is comprised of, is composed of, somebody who studies English can tell. A bunch of chunks of which foundation is one. Foundation's going up by a little bit, so I'm assuming something other's going down.
Our formula aids.
The formula aid?
Foundation aids, and there's formula aids.
Yeah.
The formula aids are based on previous year's
Okay.
allowable expenditures.
Got it.
So our foundation aid went up a little bit.
Yep.
But the overall
The
aid is
formulas.
down because of the formulas.
And is that based on, and the formula for next year is based on what we are spending this year on some allowable categories? Is that a way to say that?
Yes, it's based on, the last reported was 17-18
Okay.
expenditures. That drives the 18-19. Then the file is frozen at a certain point in time,
Yep.
so that they can project for next year. But then, of course, there's always the final budget in April.
It gets adjusted to actual.
It gets adjusted.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
This slide may not, it displays okay. Again, hopefully folks are following along at home. But you will have heard Ms. Dinio speak in the past to our history with foundation aid. You'll hear many school districts lamenting about foundation aid being funded in its entirety because it has not been for a considerable amount of time. If you were to just look over the last 10 school years, the amount we have received in aid versus what we would have received if the state was funding it in its entirety, we are owed close to $5.8 million in additional dollars. So you'll hear us and many school districts lobby for the full phase-in and funding of the foundation aid and the influence that has on programming. $5 million is a significant amount of money in terms of program over the course of several years. So our budget's going to be organized in 3 propositions. The first is the actual school budget vote. The second is the student transportation vehicle and maintenance equipment. And then the third is the capital referendum, and I'll give an overview of each. The school budget component is the most extensive this evening. And our proposition is really driven by 2 elements. One, our district goals, which we established last school year. And I took the first sentence of each of our goals and posted them here. Obviously, they're a little more nuanced to this as they're posted on our website, but I wanted them to be on one slide. So this is influencing how we entered into our budget development process, as well as the parameters that were established by the board. I just want to review those. We want to meet our district goals and objectives that were derived from the strategic plan as best possible for the upcoming school year. Stay within the tax cap, but the board, with your permission, we developed a proposal up to the levy limit. And we want to use as a basis wherever possible to maintain all current levels of programming, meaning the opportunities that our students have in our school year this year, we want to be present and available to our students next school year as well. And that formed the basis for our budget development process. So some review from information that I presented last week. We offer some of the smallest class sizes in the region. That's a benefit if you send your children to Haldane. They have the opportunity to work in very small learning environments and receive a lot of small group instruction or individualized attention. As an overview for that, and I couldn't highlight any particular row, just where I pulled this from, so I put the arrow in here so people could identify Haldane easier. You'll see where we fall in relation to our peers in the Putnam, Northern Westchester region, in the Common Branch areas, which is defined as grades 1 through 6, third out of 18 schools. And then I picked a few classes just throughout the program, English 7 being 7th grade English in our middle school. We have the lowest class sizes in the region. Math 7, again, middle school class, lowest class sizes in the region. At the secondary or at the high school level, global history and geography being a class that most kids in our region take. We offer, or our students are generally attending classes, the lowest size classes in the region. So that's a significant part of our program. Goes towards keeping class sizes relatively low. In addition to that, our students perform very well, as you're aware, perform well above the New York State and regional averages on the Regents exams. This is just a trend of our student performance on the Earth Science exam. I did add a note to this from last week. 84% of Haldane students performed at or above proficiency on this exam in 2018. While the New York State average was 73%. Living environment, 94% of students performed at or above proficiency, while the New York State average was 73%. And when we look to high school ELA, 96% of Haldane students were at or above proficiency. The New York State average was 79%. It's difficult to calculate a regional percentage when it comes to this. I can plot every district on there, and you would see that Haldane falls in the upper quartile in our region. But to actually get an actual percentage, there was a lot of math involved in that I just, between last week and this week, I didn't quite have a chance to do. In addition to this, our students perform very well on the SAT and ACT exams. I did pull one graphic from this that I added from last week. So you'll see here Haldane students are represented by the dark blue bar on the left-hand side of each column. The bar next to it is representative of the New York State average performance on AP exam performance. I'm sorry. There's a couple of things on this slide. I'm sorry. AP results. I'm sorry. I was speaking of SAT. I threw myself off a little bit in ACT, but I also wanted to provide some information about AP results. Excuse me. On these results, you'll see that Haldane students are doing very well in comparison to other students in New York, as well as globally on the advanced placement exams. So we provide a great program for our kids. And our kids do very well. As I mentioned last week, we provide a very rich program experience, class sizes being part of that, and deep learning experiences for our students. However, I do feel that the tax cap does limit our ability to dramatically expand program opportunities for us and for many school districts. So our focus, it forces us in a position to maintain program wherever possible, and if and when there's an opportunity to expand it, to really sit with that and try to do so. But more often than not, we're in a position of maintenance with a tax cap. Something that I do think is an important point of reference for our community members is that we provide a very good program for our kids, and we're pretty fiscally conservative in doing so. We spend less per student compared to other districts in the region. So any additional revenue that the district's in a position to generate really will help us address what I feel are long-term needs and keep our students competitive within the region. And just as an overview of this, and I could pull every school in the PNW region, but I stuck with just Putnam County here. You'll see our average per pupil expenditure on the general education end and the special education end here in comparison to our peers throughout the county. I did not include Garrison here simply because when Garrison is included, being an incredibly small school district, the figures can get really out of whack and skewed by the unique size of being a K-8 district. This is information that comes from the New York State report cards, and you can see here we're lower than others.
Just a quick question on this. And this is sort of indicative of geography, but mentally, how do you think about what our peer set is?
Putnam, Northern Westchester.
Is there a scale issue, like a size issue, and
You could argue that.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
But I think when it comes to those districts, and this information is really driven by instructional expenditures.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
there's some equating that goes on there. And we're in a cohort of school districts, all of these school districts who are identified as lower need school systems. So I think, when those factors are considered, while it may not, you could argue it's not completely apples to apples, I think it's close. And there's no perfect science when you're trying to compare the monies that go into one school system as compared to another, because the dynamics in each community are different, or maybe very different. And we're unique as a community, and it'd be tough to say, well, which school districts are kind of like Cold Spring and Phillipstown and whatnot. But I do think it's, if we were to look to other school systems and the level of programming that they offer, I think we're able to do a lot with what we have. But there are school districts in the region for a modest amount of additional funding per student are able to offer a lot more, perhaps. I shouldn't say a lot more, are able to offer more to our kids. And that should be a conversation we have over time. And I realize this isn't necessarily the manner in how information has been presented in the past, but I feel like part of the budget development process can be utilized to provoke a dialogue in our community about how we want to best spend taxpayer dollars for our kids. So these are somewhat intentional in provoking good questions and good conversation, not just tonight, but in the forum that follow from here.
But it is, and I can't remember exactly how New York State does it, but New York State does have a pretty nuanced categorization system for identifying similar schools.
Correct.
And it really like Dr. Bldg said, it's difficult to identify the right match, but I would think it would be a really good approach.
Yeah, it's no coincidence if you were to go south from here, and I was looking at some things today, the ranges vary pretty significantly in that northern Westchester region, but you'd be surprised. Maybe not in the way you always, you would think, but it does range. So here you see a range where we're at, 12,800 and all the way up to 15,700. And if I were to look at the northern Westchester group, and I excluded the schools that fell out of our category of low needs. So this wouldn't include like a Peekskill or an Ossining, because there's a certain level of need there, and it wouldn't be an appropriate comparison. Their instructional revenues are driven sometimes by increased state and federal allocations. On the high end, 18,500, and on the low end, 14,300. So.
Actually, Ms. Formularo, we used to get those booklets that compared all the schools. Oh, you
Those
did?
come at the end of the year, I feel like.
Is it the end of the year?
I don't
remember when they come in. I thought they came in the fall actually, but I'm
Oh,
not
they may have.
sure.
A report card.
Yeah.
I got one because I went to a new board member conference or something.
But-
I had one out.
Yeah, and this is
actually
all
really
information that's on the
comprehensive.
school
Yeah.
report card. So the difficult piece with this is the school report card fiscal supplement is usually lagging a year. So this is 16-17 data. So you're always in that position when you're looking at the major school accountability or fiscal data. You're always behind. But these types of spending don't shift dramatically year over year. So all that being said, it's important that we continue to make an investment in our schools. I believe to the extent that is allowed by the levy limit, because it keeps our schools, most importantly our students, competitive in the region. So this is where we get into a bit of the nuance of what we're recommending in order to provide that same quality of program, in addition to propose a few other things through this budget development cycle. The first, as Ann's cited in previous budget presentations, we were always dealing with a deficit, and we had a deficit to resolve. If we're carrying our program that currently exists over into next school year, it comes automatically at an increased cost. So we're recommending the reduction of the equivalent of 2 teacher aide positions, along with we realized some efficiencies in our scheduling, that we think we could also reduce 2 stipends that our teachers receive for fulfilling additional duties. These would be 6-period assignments that we likely will not need next school year, to offset part of that budget deficit. The other way we'd like to offset it, again, is to levy to the maximum extent allowed under the tax levy limit. Those are probably the 2 main contributors to that. I know there may be some questions regarding the teacher aide positions, and a couple of notes on that. We're fortunate to be in a position where we have some staff who are scheduled to retire. So we're likely in a position, or we are in a position, where through making these reductions, we won't be faced with laying anybody off. My recommendation would be that we just do not fulfill those positions once our folks have retired at the end of this school year. The impact to program would be most likely a reduction to the level of teacher aide support we provide to a few of our general education classrooms at the elementary level for support. So we may have a few of our teacher aides, or we may have our teacher aides who provide 30 minutes 2 times per week to a 2nd grade teacher, and really at that teacher's direction, they utilize them in a variety of ways. It may be working with a group of students for that 30 minutes. It may be doing some administrative tasks like photocopying or grading. And I say may because I do think it provokes examination of how we schedule our aides to see if there's a way we can still provide a level of support, perhaps through realizing other scheduling efficiencies, where maybe we can offset that perceived loss in our planning for next school year. But if not, that's the likely impact. We have aides who are providing a level of support to classrooms at the elementary level, and there would be a reduction to that. I was presenting to our elementary staff on this today, just so they had a heads up on it. One thing that I was candid about, Mr. Wallach and I both were candid about, that there still is a significant level of aid support, but we would likely seek to maintain little to no reduction at the kindergarten level and at the 1st grade level to the extent that we could. So this impact to general ed support would likely be at the 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade levels, so 5th grade potentially as well. It's not a lot of time that our teachers get each week. It's important to them, but it's not generally a lot of time that those teachers receive, because it's our K and 1 teachers who are receiving the bulk of that time, kindergarten primarily and 1st grade as well.
How many maybe the wrong question. How many teacher aide positions currently work in the elementary school?
Sure.
And
Mr. Wallach, I don't mean to call you to the mic, but if I remember correctly, it's 15?
It's 15, and 6 of those also share duties in the middle school, so 6 of the 15 are in both buildings. 4 or 5 of them are full-time, full-time being 6.5 hours plus a lunch break. The rest are all part-time, which is 5 hours.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Wallach. So that's what I mean when I say there's probably some things to dig into there. Granted, there's some part-time timers, but 15 is a big number. We only have 18 sections at our elementary school. Now, granted, some of them are shared with the middle school, but likely we could look into that and see if there's a level of support we can continue to provide. Maybe we're not seeing something in our scheduling or usage of those aides that we could re-examine to offset, again, any perceived loss in this one area.
And this would be 2 full-times?
The
Full-time
equivalent
equivalents?
thereof.
Okay.
1 full-time, and I think we're 2 part-timers.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah. We've also reviewed our expense trends over the last 4 or 5 years across several line items. This would include heating, fuel, gasoline, other staffing areas, and made further adjustments to projected costs to develop this proposal. So while I said, that budget gap is going to be offset by the reduction of 2 teacher aide positions or the equivalent thereof, additional funds we're able to levy. There were other lines that we looked at to make smaller changes to throughout the budget, which add up when you go line by line. We did see a few opportunities as we were sitting with the budget development process this school year in our planning for next school year. One of which I shared with you last week, which was to reevaluate how we budget for professional development. We're recommending that we contract with P&W BOCES for leadership support in the area of curriculum and instruction for next school year. As I mentioned last week, 16 out of 18 districts in our region have such support established already. We do not, and Garrison does not, which is not surprising. We're 2 of the smaller school districts in our region. However, given the extensive changes in school accountability processes and shifts in the New York State standards for learning, budgeting for support in this area, I think, is most responsible and timely at this point. Now, our early payment to New Tech Network, which I mentioned last week, allows for us to make this shift with little impact to the overall budget. As you're aware, we've budgeted for New Tech at approximately $70,000 per year in our work with them over a 5-year period of time. Given other realizations through this year's budget development process, we're coming in under budget, and I believe it was appropriate to issue payment early to New Tech Network on what was owed on that contract, which means we were planning to go into next school year having a payment to make to New Tech Network in the amount of $70,000, which we can now divert to having our own internal support for curriculum and instruction. With respect to the support through Putnam, Northern Westchester BOCES, that would be unique to Haldane, in that no other district in our region necessarily is accessing that level of support in leadership services from BOCES because they already have their own internal support. That being said, the benefit of working through P&W BOCES is that they have several individuals with whom they contract to keep on staff for referral to school systems as needs arise. So it could be a specific project, it could be a specific issue, and more often than not, these are retired assistant superintendents who provide this level of support to surrounding school districts. And that's what we would position ourselves to be in the place, or who we would be in the place to contract with for this service for next school year. It would be a retired assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction, likely from a surrounding school district that's interested in still working in schools. And then we would have the benefit of not just having support in that area, but having support from somebody who's likely very well established and experienced to provide us and help us get this off the ground through next school year. So that's the benefit on that.
Yes, a
Yep.
quick clarifying question. So the previous slide said that 16 of the 18 P&W BOCES component districts
Correct.
already have, you said 16 of 18 already have this support, but what I just want to elaborate and make sure
Yep.
that I understood what you said, that 16 of the 18 component districts have an established administrative position devoted to curriculum instruction, and that we don't, and that instead of that, we would be taking advantage of these BOCES services more than other districts
You're correct.
do. Okay, thanks. I actually didn't realize
I
the
had the
16
same
of 18,
question.
because I actually had thought that maybe the 16 of 18 was referring to 16 of 18 are drawing on P&W
Yes,
BOCES for those services. So
Got it.
that's a helpful distinction
Sure.
for me to make.
I'll make sure I make the distinction in any report, whether it be on the slide deck or verbally as I'm meeting with other groups. But I wanted to emphasize that point as well as that in that I think our colleagues across the region, some of which are very small school districts, have realized that the level of needs that exist currently in the area of curriculum and instruction necessitate having a full-time person in-house to facilitate that work. And that's something I think we really need to consider, obviously in next year in part, but over the long term as well.
No, and I appreciate sort of introducing it as an idea. It was an idea that was introduced to the community several years ago, granted very suddenly, and there wasn't the time for people,
Right.
I think, to develop an understanding about it, and it was taken off the table.
Right.
So I really do appreciate the thoughtful introduction of this as something
Yeah.
for us to be considering over the long
I'm familiar
term.
with the
It's worth-
history,
Yeah,
so I've tried to listen as well as I can to that, and obviously I'm trying to be very mindful of that going in because I realize that's part of our past, and I don't, there may be a tendency for folks to go right to that,
Right.
because that's where we last left off when we were talking about adding an assistant superintendent. So I see this as potentially a very a nice bridge
Yeah,
into
right.
that conversation. And I think the community, and what I like about Phillipstown and Cold Spring is, there's that element of, well, show me what you can do. So it gives us an opportunity to see what a person in this position can do for a year, and have this continued conversation as a board and as an administration, and then decide at that point, is it worth making a further investment in?
Yeah.
But I think it's worth noting that this is, the superintendent number 2 who made it very clear that they both felt like this was a need in our school
Yeah.
system, that we are missing this curriculum instruction piece. There's a need for it, and that it would serve our school district to have it. And I appreciate the difference in approach to that conversation, but the finding is still the same. And, I think that's something for all of us to listen to.
One point of clarification with respect to the other districts, because it is an important distinction. Some of the smaller school districts have decided that that person may fulfill a dual role. So it's curriculum and instruction, and it may be also helping with certain human resource functions or human resource leadership. I don't think that's a bad idea. Two different
diverse skill set.
I would say it's a very diverse skill set, two very different brains usually. But when it comes to recruitment of professional staff, I think that could go a long way. Having a person who's focused in part on recruiting teaching staff or recruiting administrators. So I think there is some benefit to structuring it that way.
I think what's important to note is that you keep bringing up the fact that there's been such shifts in curriculum, and it's almost impossible to keep up.
Yeah.
And that's really where the need is.
Right.
I don't personally think that's how it was presented several years ago. So I think we really need to pay attention and keep the focus on the fact that curriculum is shifting rapidly, and there's a need because we can't keep up internally. Principals wear many hats here. Superintendent wears many hats here, and we often lose that focus of curriculum because everybody is going 100 miles an hour with a million things.
That's interesting because I've always thought about it as just a massive upside because it's such a small district that there's what interesting things you can do K through 12 in a cohesive curriculum, but you've also got there's incredible opportunity to take advantage of the district as it sits.
Yes.
And you've also got all of these state and federally mandated curricular changes that you need to accommodate
Right.
in the process of taking advantage of the opportunity.
Yes.
So,
And it's happening on all fronts, which we
what was
talked
it,
about
5
last week.
or something?
Last week, tapping in every major content area, so math, science, ELA, and social studies. And then you have new school accountability frameworks through the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is going to be a big deal
Social emotional
for us.
learning.
Right.
And then you have other
emphasis.
specific community-based,
Yeah.
I'd say, areas that you want to give attention to, just because there's a community desire to give further attention to it. That may not be required by law or regulation, and we don't define ourselves by the minimum expectation right here. So that's something we have to be very wary of. Okay. Now, in addition to that, we really took a look at our spending in technology support over the last few years, and I think a better move for us would be to hire our own, someone with the title equivalent to or something like a microcomputer service specialist in lieu of contracting for such services through EduTech. So we currently, the structure of our technology department currently is a teacher on special assignment who essentially serves as our director of technology. So she oversees the entire department. Remember, in technology, there's the tech integration end. So how do our students interact with various technologies, or how are various technologies integrated into the teaching of content into our area? And then there's a whole nother end of the network, the infrastructure, the support accompanying that. So that side of it, we contract with EduTech, we contract with a service, a vendor, to provide us support for network issues, which can range and run the gamut in any given week. With what we spend on EduTech, we're very close to just for 2 days a week of support. We could hire our own individual, or we're pretty close to being able to fulfill a salary for 5 days of support. So, and there are civil service titles that seem consistent with what we would need. I must admit, in this area, there's still some work to do. We know these titles exist. We know these people exist who are certified to provide infrastructure support to the school district. What the specific title may be may end up being a little different than microcomputer service specialist. We're going to sit with that a little bit longer. But when I just look in terms of spending, there's no reason why I think we could get more service and have our own, through having our own person on site than contracting out.
So the director, the person serving as the director
The
of
TOSA.
technology, the TOSA, that would remain intact.
I'm not proposing any changes to that for next school year.
I'm sorry, can I go back? So we talked about the curriculum, proposed curriculum director being hired via BOCES.
Yes.
What does that mean for BOCES aid?
It will increase the following year.
Okay.
It's the benefit of, one of the benefits of contracting with BOCES is that the more you spend with BOCES, the more you get back. But that being said, it's those rates vary depending on what you're contracting with BOCES for. So the aid rates can range, and I don't want to put you on the spot, Ann, but I know it's as high as 50% on some items, and it could be as low as 15%, if I'm not mistaken, on others. For the way we get it back from BOCES, essentially all of our service requests are packaged, and then we receive a reimbursement on that. We could dig into that a little bit more to give you the exact reimbursement rate on that such position, but it's an important distinction. It is.
Recognize that
It is.
This is a very different move than
Correct.
we were looking at
Right.
several years ago.
But it doesn't mean that we wouldn't we'd necessarily want to stick with that in the long haul. Because I'm not saying anything that you're going to disagree
No, I know.
Right.
with, but it's
No, I think the on-site full-time, our own person support is a better long-term move. But I'm trying to be respectful of, one, our budget and what we can support next year. In addition to our history, give us an opportunity to sit with this for a period of time before I make any further recommendations in that area. So this is, I believe, my final program-specific recommendation, I think. So as we also look at our spending and review our spending over the last few years with BOCES for contracted services, seeing that we spend for contract services in the area of behaviorist support at a rate that would justify having our own person fulfill that role. And similar to the support and technology, we're likely in a position where we could have an even greater quality of service for close to the same cost. Because whenever you're contracting out, you're being billed for every little thing. Whereas when you have your own people in-house, when you're not being billed, they're on contract, and you typically will realize more time from that particular individual or some efficiencies for a similar level of spending or cost. So in listening to the community, examining some of the places we've been with this discussion over the last year into this year, I think we would benefit from having an additional social worker or potentially a school counselor or a school psychologist on staff. And I would say with the stipulation that that person have or be a board certified behavior analyst and have that credential, because that would allow them to serve as a behaviorist when it came to addressing certain behavioral needs that may be required as part of a student's IEP. Or quite frankly, just a student, some of our little guys who come in sometimes and aren't used to being in a school setting have some unique behavior that require additional support and work of our staff to kind of show them a different way. So having a behaviorist on site would be beneficial in a variety of ways, both for our general education program, but also for our special education program. Our spending in this area through contracted services has been right around $70,000 for the last 2 years. $70,000. Again, we're pretty close to a salary there for social worker, counselor, or psychologist, and then the benefits we can absorb again through some of those other reductions that we're making on other line items, or adjustments, I should say, we're making to other line items. So through this, I feel like we're getting more support at a close enough cost to justify making this transition. And it also will help us address, because the behaviorist support is not, we don't require full-time behaviorist support. So where an individual may not be working in developing behavior intervention plans or conducting functional behavior assessments for our students, we would likely benefit from the support of the social worker end of that, or the school psychologist end of that, or the school counselor end of that, whatever other certification they may have. Typically, your folks who are board certified behavior analysts have certification in one of those other three areas. They're going in for counseling or for a degree in counseling at the school level, and then they realize, they can receive an advanced credential to become a behaviorist. So they usually have both. So I would see this as being a K-12 position, not specific to any school, an individual who could address certain needs in behaviorist support and then provide additional social work, counseling, or psychologist support as needed throughout the school district. So as we begin to transition to other areas or other propositions that are much more brief in explanation, really the entirety of this first part of the presentation, I believe, it best reflects the parameters that were established by the Board of Education, perhaps even goes beyond maintaining a current level of educational program. I think we have a unique opportunity where we could, here next year, perhaps extend certain elements of our program for the upcoming year, but at the same time honors those parameters to the extent as established by the board. I spoke to this earlier, and I may very well just move this slide earlier in the presentation. It probably should sit there. This is just another visual overview of our budget-to-budget spending over time and the levy-to-levy increases over time. So you can see It really does vary. Some of it's driven by the tax cap, and you'll see fluctuations like this with the tax cap, but you don't see dramatic fluctuations. So our levy increases range really from close to 1% or 0.75% to 2 3/4% over the last 4 years, and considering what we're proposing into next year. I think we did like a 15-year look back on this, and you'll see fluctuations, of 12% or so, if you get back into the mid-2000s before the this is where the exemplifies where the tax cap has had its desired effect in controlling costs in school systems, not just here, but throughout the state. So Proposition 2 is pretty standard. We replace a vehicle every year. The gist of this is it costs us more to lease vehicles than it does to buy them when the financing is considered. And we have to replace them because eventually, over time, each of our vehicles come to the end of their allowable use. The message to taxpayers is if Prop 2 doesn't pass, we're going to end up spending more money for the same thing. Now, we will typically attach maintenance equipment to the vehicle proposition as well. We have facilities here that we have to maintain and that we're responsible for maintaining. We use a lot of equipment to maintain our fields and our grounds to our campus and to work on our vehicles and whatnot. So at the same time, we're proposing an update to some of the maintenance equipment. This would be inclusive of accessories and equipment for existing utility vehicles, including a power broom and a liftgate. Look
Just
forward
as
to
a
that.
reminder to me, how many vehicles do we have?
We have 2 pickups. We have Kubota. We have a Ventrac, which is what we're using for the snow removal,
There we
and
go.
that's what the power broom, so that
Oh,
it
there
could
we
be versatile for all
Yep.
seasons.
Yep. But in terms of buses, how many buses do we have?
Buses,
Gotcha.
We'll get back to you.
I'll get back
Okay,
to you.
all right. I'm just thinking about, if we have 10 buses, and I think we have more than that.
We do have more
Okay.
than that.
And everyone lasts 10 years.
About 10 years.
Expectation is you're going to replace at least once a year, and that's why.
Yep.
And everyone's like, oh, didn't we just buy a bus last year? You did, but you bought the bus that we bought 12 years ago, or
Correct.
whatever the number.
Correct.
Okay.
We
Yep.
have a varied fleet. We have a car, we have minivans, we have small buses, and we have big buses. And they age out at different times. And basically, we use our vehicles until they don't pass DOT inspection, which we're trying to get away from, and we're sort of like crossed that threshold where we're actually getting some trade-in value on some vehicles that are nearing their end of life, only we're getting more than scrap for them. So
Great. Thank you.
that's our plan.
The language listed on the bottom here is the language that would be included on the actual proposition when folks go to vote, correct, Ann?
Correct.
So. All right, Prop 3, the last proposition, just a few detailed slides here. So this is the capital referendum, and there's really 3 primary areas that this referendum seeks to address: program improvements, health and safety, and the preservation of existing facilities. Ann had provided a detailed report on this earlier in the budget season, so we've condensed that down just to a few overview slides that the board has seen before. But for the community, we'll certainly expand on these items as we're out presenting the budget. I'm not going to name each of these as we go through. Again, they're posted here for reference, but there's a variety of facilities, areas that need to be updated that fall under the umbrella of health and safety. That if we don't replace them now, they present a legitimate issue to the health and safety of our staff or our students or our facility. There's also several areas of our campus that we'd like to continue to preserve, no different than your homes. Over time, you need to make updates to keep the house in good working order, and that's what we're proposing for certain updates to our facilities here on campus. Windows replacements, door replacements, updating playground equipment, some paving around campus, although it's not as bad as the area of the Taconic I drive down every day. Some fencing in and around campus that's become a bit unsightly and also potentially unsafe, storage, and then some painting. As far as program improvement, despite our relatively small size, we're pretty full here. So there's some updates we can make to the district office and the Maple Merit building that will allow us to create additional educational space. There's some shading that we could update or add to our buildings that would allow for better temperature control, I guess, if control is probably the wrong word, but help offset some of the dramatic spikes in temperature we see, in particular at the beginning and the end of the school year. We do want to create some shared spaces that do have climate control, that are air conditioned. If you recall, back in September, the first few days of school, and this always seems to happen this way, where it's 95 degrees and there's these cries for air conditioning in school. And those might be just the warmest school. Those might be an anomaly. They're just happen to be the hottest days of the year, and they fall on the first few days of the school year. That being said, when you have days like those, there's very little learning going on in classrooms which temperature is upwards of 95 degrees. So if we were able to have a few shared spaces where classroom teachers can go to, where they could facilitate a lesson or small group instruction, it would go a long way to maintaining some continuity to the program on days like that. So that's that there. Now, for both the budget and the capital referendum, we do plan to provide opportunities over the spring for anybody who's interested in the community to come examine these spaces with Nabil and Ann, maybe me, and talk through any questions or concerns that they may have about the need for these updates to be made. We feel strongly that if folks take the time to come and see what we're talking about, if they have questions, they'll understand that these are reasonable updates that need to be made to our school facility. And we'll also have some time on the back end of those walkthroughs to talk about the financing for the project. We are coming upon a time where we can finance these projects or this project and have very little impact on the amount of taxes that anybody is paying now because of other debt service that will be falling off over the next 5 years. So we're dropping off debt, we're paying off debt, we're adding on new debt. It won't impact someone's tax bill. So this is a tax neutral proposition. And I think it comes at a time where, we need it. Ann's gone through the financing in the past, but generally the scope of this project is likely to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.3 million. We can offset the cost through various capital repair reserves that we have. And then we're financing, our net finance will be $1.6 million. We would receive a certain amount of building aid for the project, and then we would be financing through, if I'm not mistaken, bond anticipation notices over a 5-year period or 4-year period?
4 to 5,
4 to
depends
5
on
year
what
period.
the rates are going to be. 5, I would think.
And through those machinations, which Ann is entirely responsible for, it turns out to be very little net cost to the community. Again, we've gone through that before, and we'll go through that in more detail with any community member who wishes to do so. This isn't an exhaustive date, but we have a few key dates I just wanted to mention before closing. Tonight's our administrative proposal. We'll have the pre-budget hearing next meeting. April 23rd is an important date. That's when the board will decide what to adopt in terms of presenting to the community. So again, we're in this period of time for about 5 weeks or so where we can further discuss any, the administration will listen for any direction that the board wishes to provide in modifying its proposal. We have our formal public hearing on May 7th. However, there will be dates between now and April 23rd where I'll be presenting the budget or providing an opportunity for community members to come in and hear parts of this very same presentation. But the formal public hearing will occur at the May 7th board meeting. And then on May 21st, we have our budget vote and our trustee election. That comprises the administration's recommendation to the Board of Education. I do want to just thank the administration, our building principals, and Nabil, Mr. Salem, have been, and Selena Fisher, our interim support and PPS, have really all been instrumental in helping pull this together. We've been working very hard as a group over the last 3 months, and some things really started to come together towards that last month, but that's why you start early. When you give yourself that space and that time, it helps you see things that you may not see when you're if you try to do things too quickly. So we feel really proud about what we're able to propose to the Board of Education, and we think it's reflective again of the parameters established by the board, but also of some of the values that we've heard from the community over the last few months. So with that, we'd certainly like to spend any more time that you wish answering any questions that you may have.
I have a couple more questions.
Sure. I'll keep the presentation up just if you want us to refer back to anything.
Can we circle back to the teaching assistant reduction recommendation?
Teacher aides.
Teacher aides.
Teacher aide,
Sorry,
yep.
thank you.
And I'm
I
sorry.
was like TA, and then I was like, no, say the whole thing.
I know,
said
it's
the whole
confusing.
Thing wrong.
I'm going to have to excuse me for this taking a little bit of time because I have to go back slide by slide in my presentation mode, actually.
Well, that's okay. I don't need the slide.
I'll tell you.
You mentioned that you spoke a little bit about what you felt like we would be losing in the reduction of the 2 full-time equivalent TA
Yep.
positions. And then you mentioned that you may be able to still find some of those things that we're losing in different scheduling efficiencies and looking deeper into the schedules of the other TAs, and we might be able to still get some of those things just with more scheduling efficiencies. Potentially. So then should we assume that if we were to not get any of those things back, if we couldn't find that that support in other positions, that you believe that it's okay, that we're going to be fine, we're not really needing that support in the way that we currently have it?
I think we'll be just fine if we couldn't provide that level of support to the, potentially first. I know it's, I said second, but, there might be an impact on a small impact on first grade through 5th grade teachers. I do. And I'm cautious when I say that because any adult who comes into our school and works with our kids in our school in any capacity undoubtedly is providing a service to our students and to our community. But that being said, I do think when it comes to our students' ability to have a positive social experience in school and a positive academic experience in school, we'll be able to provide that to our kids and guarantee that next school year through a reduction of the equivalent of 2 aide positions. And I say that with little reservation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I just, on behalf of the board, want to thank you, Anne, and all the administrators for your hard work.
Thank you, Laura.
It obviously shines through that thought was put into this, and I certainly appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you really listened to the board. I mean, we all really, I felt like, yes, we gave these general parameters of stay within the tax cap, and keep the enrollments where they are, but we also give very specific things that we've noticed that the school needs, and the social emotional piece has been something that we've all been talking about as a group for years at this point. And the technology piece is something we've all been talking about for years at this point. And so those are real needs that the board has certainly recognized. And I think we all really appreciate that your budget proposal clearly reflects that. So thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I guess my only, and this is not really a concern about the presentation at all, but for folks who haven't been paying close enough attention, I feel like you kind of underemphasize the fact that there was a real like to maintain programming,
Sure.
there was a real deficit. Like that's the thing. I think it was such a really, intelligent and thoughtful and graceful and in a really good way presentation and representing that thinking, that I don't want to glide too smoothly over the fact that, once again, to maintain our program, there was a deficit from the rollover budget of $500,000.
Sounds right.
It was $500,000, and that's a significant amount of money in a $24 million budget.
It is.
And the way that I like what you said, like every adult that comes in is likely providing something of service to our
Absolutely.
students.
Yep.
But you laid out just so clearly, like the really important, all these really important pieces that we've been talking about, and things that we don't have the expertise to recognize, which is really raising to the surface again the challenges that all districts face to keep up with changing standards and the need with someone to have
Right.
someone here with that curriculum instruction expertise. So I just super appreciative of. I mean, I can't even imagine how much work must have gone into this, and it's really so informative.
Thank you. I will, when we're presenting to other groups, I think I'm presenting to the PTA next week. There'll be other community opportunities to come in. We will be a little more illustrative of what we were facing going into budget development and where we are now. Obviously, this is a reflective of a conversation we've been having for
A couple of months.
since January,
Yeah.
right? And, parameters we established in December. So,
Mm-hmm.
so obviously, you've been along. We've all been along for the ride. But any other forum, I'll try to set the context up using some of the slides or points of emphasis we had early on with the board, just to walk folks through it. But also trying to do so in about 15 or 20 minutes, as opposed to the hour that we've spent here tonight. So, that's the give and take. Is that when you're at a PTA meeting, there's it's their agenda, not mine or ours. So, I'll try to be more brief.
Something that is, I think everyone's used to seeing, the board certainly is, in the budget proposal that we did not see, was that usually there's like a number breakdown.
Yeah.
Anne makes this slide, and she says, this is where we're at, and this is how much the reduction in TAs would save us, and this is how much the, computer specialist position would cost, and there's this number breakdown that was not included, and I'm assuming that was very purposeful.
It was.
So could you speak a little bit to that kind of shift in your presentation style, and if anybody is missing that information, what would you say to them?
Well, we have it, and we can provide it, and we want to be transparent. So if the board or any community member really wanted to get into the detail, when I mentioned fuel oil, what is that adjustment exactly on that line? And has that Excel spreadsheet to provide and go over. So anybody who wants it can see it. And if we're going to provide it to one person, we may as well just post it and provide it to everybody. As far as my thought and perspective going into this, it's just try to stay focused on the big picture and the bigger themes and the narrative the story we're trying to tell through this budget development process. And I think, with this slide deck or presentation, I just tried to stay focused on the narrative and not get into a level of detail if I didn't have to, but realizing someone may want it and having it prepared to go. So we have that information in the backup that's been provided to the board in the past, and we're ready to provide it whenever anybody wants it. So with this, realizing people may just want a kind of an overview, what's going on in this year's budget development, I looked at it as you're telling a story. Your budget should tell a story about where you are and where you're trying to go. So I tried to do that through these slides.
And we recognize you didn't just pull the deficit of 504,000 out of a hat.
I wish I could, Laura.
There had to
It
have
would
been
have saved
some
some
sort
of us our sanity. Yeah.
But what I really appreciate is that that deficit is being made up basically through efficiencies. And that's what's really important, because to me, I'm understanding that you're really taking a look at where we could be more efficient. And
Yes, we're starting to. And I think something the board may want to consider in the future, and we'll sit with this, isn't for this budget cycle by any means, is we may be forced to, depending on the way the tax cap plays out in any given year, to really look at what other areas in our scheduling can we realize some of those efficiencies with no impact on students. That comes at an investment. There's people who specialize in such things who you can come in and really examine that, but there are some things that stand out where there just may be a different way at entering into how we schedule our staff, honoring everything contractually, honoring again, the same program opportunities for our students, just rethinking it in a way that allows us to realize some efficiencies and provide the same level of support, or use those efficiencies and the money that inevitably costs to expand program. But something that just jumps out: our elementary, middle, and high school all run on different schedules, but they share staff. That's inefficient. So we're losing something just in that process. It may be just, a 0.2 of a position, but that's cost. And we could maybe restructure that 0.2 to provide a level of service that in another area that we need. So there's some good work to be done there.
I just had a quick question on the infrastructure. When last I dipped into this, there was safety audit going on that would potentially have some ramifications that were as of yet undetermined, and I noticed a line in there which was, there may be some changes, but it won't meaningfully affect the total. Can you just talk about status and where things are with that?
Yeah, so I figured out how to manipulate this. We received the draft, so the board approved Alteris facilitating a safety audit. They have done so through the months of January and early February. They provided me with a draft of the audit today. So I actually received it today. It's sitting on my desk, and big thing I printed out. There's some good recommendations in there that we probably should consider if there's still an opportunity to include as part of this narrative, that I think will make sense to a lot of people. That Alteris will define the recommendations as priority, meaning you should do this in the next 3 months. Mid-level, and then long-term considerations. There's a few priority elements in there. Just upon giving it a quick scan, I have to go through it in more detail. And the board will see this report. It's in draft form right now, so I'm reviewing it before it goes to the board. But you'll see a few of those recommendations in the priority realm that we were kind of using some placeholders here, thinking we'll have something from there that we may want to consider that we'll now be able to describe in detail once we start doing this work, and then include as part of the budget. I believe the cost for those, I should be careful on how much I speak to it, but I think what we've kind of used as placeholders will allow us to address those areas. The cost won't exceed what we've had in place as a placeholder in that $2.3 million total proposition. Yeah.
We were sort of aiming at a total bond.
Correct.
And then we're going to make it work within the pieces
Correct.
underneath it. Okay.
Yeah,
So
because that's what allows it to keep it tax neutral.
Yes.
So we don't want to go
Exactly.
beyond 2.3.
Great. Okay.
And anything that's in there that may push us beyond that, I think we should just have a separate space for talking about how we're going to address that, because it would be a significant cost.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. So that's to come in the coming weeks.
Okay. But I would echo what I think everybody else has said. Thank you very much. Always appreciate the time and thought.
I
For
appreciate
me,
it.
just as an executive summary kind of guy, and I realize that I don't think it creates false trade-offs when you put everything, especially with the numbers on a slide, but I was trying to keep track of where we're getting savings and what is the programmatic increment, and it may be useful for someone who's just browsing through at home. It's like, here are the 3 things that we're doing that's going to change the program.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Your narrative.
I appreciate your feedback, John.
Should we open it up to the public for any budget comments? Is that okay, board? Does anybody?
We're at the communication for the public.
Yeah.
Oh, we are?
Yeah. Does anyone from the public have any comments about Dr. Bronte's budget proposal or questions? No? Okay, then maybe we're ready to move on from budget. Is everybody okay with that? Okay, going into, there's information reports here for the board's and public's perusal. Going into consent agenda minutes. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
It's the minutes from the February 26th workshop meeting. Any comments? Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Consent agenda financial. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Consent agenda personnel. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Moving into unfinished business, the Haldane school calendar for 2019-2020 was presented to the board last meeting. It is still here for additional comments.
One
You
comment.
go ahead.
So there was a request by one of our board members to just, how does this line up with Garrison? We're a bit ahead of Garrison in the process, so they don't have a draft that they put before their Board of Education, but Ms. Mitchell there has indicated that she'll use ours as a base to work off of in their discussion. So similar to how the question came here, well, are we consistent with Garrison? Garrison's indicated through their administration that they'll seek to be consistent with us. So. If
Yeah.
that's right.
Wondering.
So if that really is the only thing outstanding, I would, I do think we should work as best possible to get a calendar approved so we can get it out to the community and go from there.
I just had a quick process question that I didn't ask last time. Regents exams are set,
Correct.
and we back in. So one of the questions that came up for somebody was like, "Wow, this goes really late."
Yeah.
We're not moving.
No, that's driven by the
got it.
state, yeah.
Yep. Okay. Cool.
Does anyone else have any further questions about the calendar? Do we
Ready to adapt?
want to adopt it? Is everybody feeling comfortable with that? Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Ms. Famularo.
All right.
You're on.
Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby adopts the 2019-2020 Haldane School District calendar as presented.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 The availability of the petitions for the Haldane Board of Education trustee seats. Ms. Famularo, do you want to share some information for people?
Just to remind everyone that petitions are available in the district office and they are due by April 22nd, no later than 5 p.m.
There are 2 seats up for election this year, my seat and Laura Hammond's seat. Laura, would you like to state any intentions you have?
I will not be running for re-election. I want to thank all my board colleagues. It's been an awesome ride. I'm confident that it will continue to be an awesome ride. But I'm going to focus on my senior next year.
Thank you, Laura, for your service. It's been a pleasure working with you.
Thank you.
I do intend to run for re-election. And I think that's all there is to say about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, going into new business, CSE, CPSE recommendations. Ms. Famularo.
Okay, the recommended action is be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the recommendations of the Committee on Special Education and Preschool Special Education as presented.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Is there any further communication from the public at this time? Okay. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn. May I have a second, please?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.